The pandemic that's gripped the U.S. for more than 3 months has forced millions to do things differently. A segment of employees are still working from home, some now permanently remote forever. Warm hugs and business handshakes are considered a no-no for the near future, and chaotic Zoom calls with family members all chiming in at once are just a few of the big changes. But some of these mandatory modifications have led to newfound hobbies that pass the time. Whether it's baking, running, or something else, many have found a true calling that they hope to continue into post-pandemic life. One such pastime is gardening. With so many Americans stuck at home for months, the outdoor hobby has seen a big boom. Bonnie Plants is a major vegetable and herb plant producer and recently did a national survey showing there's 16 million new gardeners just this year. Out of this group, 65% listed COVID-19 as the catalyst to getting started. The survey also found that nearly 2 in 5 Americans under 35 now grow at least one herb or vegetable at home. One of these young urban gardeners is Brook Morgan. She works for a tech company in Austin, Texas, and in her free time enjoys tending to her small 10 by 20-foot plot in a nearby community garden.
I've pretty much always had a patio garden, and I even used to have a composter on my patio at one of my apartments. And then I just decided one day that I needed to just really find something bigger and more meaningful, and I needed a hobby, basically, that was a little more involved. And so I found my current community garden that I garden at. So I still live in an apartment. I live in a 1-bedroom with 2 large dogs and my boyfriend. And I drive over to my community garden plot every day.
For Morgan, she didn't always have a green thumb. Learning how to grow plants was a process, and she didn't fully jump into it until moving to Austin, where many residents are active and spend a lot of time outdoors.
When I'm actually out in the garden pruning or planting or whatever, I feel so connected to myself and my environment, and it's very meditative for me. And I think that's the kind of addicting feeling that people talk about, is it's calm. Your hands are occupied, so you can't scroll on your phone. Your brain is occupied because you're looking at things and thinking about them and figuring it out. And we don't really get that type of slowness in our day and age.
Past the benefits to her own well-being, Morgan also has access to extremely fresh produce and herbs. Even though her garden plot is so small, she makes good use of the space and is able to grow enough to cut down on the produce she buys from the grocery store by roughly 50% during the spring and summer months. She says once you taste a tomato or a cucumber grown fresh from the garden, you really can't go back to store-bought.
You just never know, what's been sprayed on the stuff you get from the grocery store, who's been handling it and all that stuff. I think my biggest example of that are my cucumbers from this year. Because usually when you get cucumbers at the store, the skin's pretty thick and, they can be kind of watery almost. My cucumbers that I grew this year, I sliced the first one and I was so proud, and they were not that big, but they were so tasty. The skin is so thin and delicate, and they just taste like a cucumber. I don't know how else to say. I don't know if I'll ever be able to eat a regular cucumber again and think to myself, oh, this tastes like a cucumber. But the stuff that you get at the store is genetically bred, and they pick varieties that are going to be holding up in the shipping process and the picking process. And, with mass food production, they're jostling all these things around. And so the skin has to be thick on cucumbers. They have to be a little bit more watery because of the mass scale that they're being produced on. But when you're just growing it in your backyard, none of that really matters.
Since it gets extremely hot early in the summer in Austin, the window to grow many plants starts in March and ends in July. Whereas in cooler parts of the country, like the Midwest, people can plant later in the spring and enjoy their garden until September. So, what are some of the other vegetables Morgan grows in her small 10 by 20-foot garden?
You have a small space into things that are going to be really highly producing, like green beans, bush beans. I have some corn. I have eggplant, bell pepper, tomatoes, cucumber, jalapenos, hatch chili peppers, zucchini, sugar baby watermelons, firecracker sunflowers. I have gray mammoth sunflowers. I also have a couple of different like kind of more heirloom, unique type of squashes. And then tons of herbs, lots of parsleys and basils, and I have some cinnamon basil, which is a little bit weird. I have some candy cane zinnias, which are these beautiful flowers. I'm growing chamomile so I can make tea. I've got a bunch of mint that I dry and make mint tea.
If you're looking to get into gardening, whether it's in your own backyard or in a community garden, start small and expand from there. Amy Enfield is a horticulturalist at Bonnie Plants and specializes in creating new plant and herb varieties that are then sold at garden centers nationwide.
What's cool about being in this industry is like all the changes that are happening. So it used to be we were steering everything that we launched from a product standpoint, plant standpoint, to these large in-ground gardens because people were putting in, 40 by 40 victory gardens. But now we realize that this next generation of gardeners, these millennials, these Gen Zs, are living in small apartments. It's a lot more city, urban gardening. And so now we have to start thinking about, well, now people are gardening more often inside. They don't have an outdoor space, or maybe they only have a tiny patio to garden on, or they just got a small plat of yard. And so now we're focusing more on raised beds. So it's kind of been a shift in how we focus on what we're actually working on and launching more so than it has been in the past. So we're spending a lot of time looking at more compact genetics to make sure that we have plants that everybody can grow and will be successful with.
For those new to the hobby, Enfield recommends starting off by finding the right varieties for your space.
Make sure you check out the plant tags when you're selecting your plants. Those tiny little starter plants you're buying in the store are going to get big. So it's important to look at how much space they're actually going to take up. So that little 5-inch plant you may buy in the store may end up taking up a good 4 square foot of space in your garden by the end of the season. I also like to say you don't have to grow one of everything. Start small, get your feet wet, maybe do a tomato, a pepper, a basil plant, a couple peppers. Now you're on your way to salsa and or pizza sauce. And as you get more adaptive and better at growing, then you can start diving into more plants, different plants. The third and fourth tip would be, one, most vegetables and herbs need a lot of sun, so make sure that you're putting your plants in a spot that's going to get at least 6 to 8 hours of sunlight during the day. And then the last tip is I always like to make sure that you locate your garden or your plants as much as possible near a source of water, because otherwise you're going to have to lug water to these plants. So it's a lot easier if you can put them close to a water source so you don't have to drag water quite so far.
And if you live in a climate where you have a shorter summer, Enfield says buy more resilient compact plants that can be harvested in as little as 30 to 40 days. Some of these vegetables include different varieties of lettuce, peppers, radishes, tomatoes, and squash. If you don't succeed at first, keep trying. Some vegetables are harder to grow than others. Reach out to the experts at your local garden center to get tips, and do research online on Gardening 101. For Morgan, she says the newfound community she's found through the hobby has been as rewarding as the produce she gets each year.
You get to connect with people of all walks of life, people who might be older than you, they might be the same age as you, they might have different experiences growing certain things. They'll kind of give you some really quite amazing tips and tricks. I had about a week or two at the beginning of the pandemic where I wasn't comfortable going to the garden, and one of my plot neighbors actually watered my flowers because they were looking kind of dead, and he hadn't seen me for a few days. So he knew that I wasn't coming and that my flowers were going to die if somebody didn't water them, and so he took it upon himself to care for another person in that community garden and water my flowers. So it's just like that piece of it is so valuable, just what you learn, because you can definitely learn a lot on like YouTube and the internet. And how I started even learning about gardening was I literally just stopped scrolling on my phone for like an hour and a half a day, and I dedicated that time to learning about gardening, and I've been incredibly successful with that.
Whether you think you have a green thumb or not, gardening is a rewarding skill that's useful throughout life. Once you have the fundamentals down, it's easy to keep learning and experimenting with new varieties of plants and herbs. To find out more about this topic and both of our guests, Brook Morgan and Amy Enfield, visit viewpointsradio.org. You can also find out more about Morgan's gardening journey through her Instagram, which we've linked to on our site. Also get expert gardening tips at bonnieplants.com. For more behind the scenes, visit Viewpoints Radio on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. This segment was written and produced by Amira Zaveri. I'm Gary Price. Coming up on Viewpoints.
So I try to give the Rangers their due, talk about their heroism, but on the other hand, I want to talk about some of the atrocities, some of the misbehavior, some of the things they did that they should not have done.
Examining the Texas Rangers of the past. Then,
the world now knows what I did today, so why do I have to write about it in my own personal space?
The evolution of social media into an online public diary. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.